Teachers, the holiday season is upon us, and you know what that means. Family parties, friends of friends parties, so much socializing. It's a great time to revisit our conversation with Chris Hall entitled, Teachers Should Be Interesting People. This episode will set you up to be a hit at all the parties. And hey, since it's the season of giving, the first 3 people who listen to the episode and tell us they liked and subscribed will get a copy of a book mentioned by Chris, The Art of Noticing. All right, welcome back. Jenette and I are here with one of our favorite people, Chris Hall, the social studies curriculum supervisor. And I have a story to tell about Chris. A couple years ago, before I knew him and worked with him here at the district, I heard him say something in a training where he said, as teachers, we have the responsibility to be interesting people. So I can't remember if that was exactly what it was, but that was kind of the message, was that like we need to be interesting people for our students. And it really stuck with me because at first I thought, well, I'm the least interesting person I know. So I thought, okay, well, I can't do that. But then as I kind of got to know Chris and see his work and his teaching, he really does practice that. He is one of the most interesting people that I know, and he really brings that into his teaching. So we're excited that you're going to be on our podcast.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. Our first question is, how did you come to this idea about becoming an interesting person and giving that to teachers as a charge?
Well, I would say I hadn't really thought about it until I came to the central office and got to spend a lot of time in teachers' rooms. And the first year that I was here, the charge that I was given was spend time in teachers' rooms, get to know teachers, get to know what's going on in classrooms across the district. And you'd be in different rooms, and I couldn't tell quite what it was, but there's just a feeling in some rooms, and the way the kids interact with teachers and the way the teachers were, and the feeling that I got in the room. And I eventually settled on some teachers were more interesting than others, and not just the lessons. The lessons can be interesting, but so were the teachers. And a lot of teaching has to do with the way you connect with kids and the rapport that you have, and those 30 seconds that, before class starts, when the kids are just excited to talk to you about things, or during lunch. And I just decided it's interesting. Some teachers are able to project to their students that life is interesting and they're interesting and they connect with more students in a different way. So
but it's kind of separate from being interested and passionate. I mean, it's included in being passionate about your content, but you're more talking like interesting in general, and is that part of it, is like just being really passionate and interested in their content, or just beyond that?
Well, I think it is part of it is content, but I think, and maybe when I said this in the training with you, because I've always thought people should, we all like interesting people, right?
Yeah.
When you're interesting, you're able to find ways to make your content relevant to kids, because you're able to pull things in that, well, you're able to make connections. Why do we learn anything if it isn't connecting to our life, enriching our life, making our lives better? And the more you know about things, the more you're able to pull those interesting moments into class. Yeah. So I think that's what it is. I think it does affect our teaching. So I do think it is about teaching.
I remember I used to occasionally pull out something I'd heard about interesting people, and that was that interesting people are interested people. And interested people are become interesting people. So there's a curiosity. When you're an interesting person, it's because you've been interested in a lot of different things. And then that curiosity leads you to have a life with rich experience, more knowledge. You read more, you listen more, you pay attention to the world around you. And then that transfers to what I think part of our job is as teachers, which is making the sell. Teachers are performers, for sure. We always talk about teaching as performance. But it's also a sales job. You're trying to persuade 35 teenagers that it's worth their time to be in your classroom, participating and listening to what you have to say. So if you're interesting and you bring that curiosity of being interested in, that makes the sales job so much easier, because the kids, because you make them think, and they're like, oh, Mr. Hall, he's always read something interesting, or he's always been listening, or he's been somewhere. And that's part of building the interest in your class itself. So I think that it just kind of reciprocates. You get interested, you become interesting.
Agreed.
Well, and I think it also inspires your students to be interested, because I can remember, I mean, I had Jenette as a teacher, and I didn't even know what NPR was until I was in her class. And I don't know if we read something or listened to something. It was that article or podcast, Always Go to the Funeral, that you did in your class.
This I Believe.
This I Believe.
Yeah.
And is that an NPR thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just remember it was like, oh my gosh, it was like a whole new world of like, oh my gosh, this is stuff that I'm interested in now.
Exactly.
And I just being inspired by.
Well, and it's so fun when you give someone the gift of the New York Times, or you give someone the gift of NPR, and like, oh my gosh, you don't even know what I'm giving you.
What's waiting out there for you.
And I feel that way with podcasts now. It's like, I'm giving you the gift of podcasting. If you're not paying attention to podcasts right now, then
You're missing
oh my
out.
gosh, there's this amazing world.
There's a world out there.
Yeah, so fun. And I was telling Kate, I listen to every podcast on 1.5 times speed, because there's so many that I want to listen to, that if I ever listen to one on regular speed, I'm like, oh my gosh, they are talking so slow. What is this?
too much information, so little time.
Maybe it's caffeine. Maybe you just drinking too much caffeine.
Could be that. Well, I kind of want to toss back to you, Chris, and ask you, how have you become an interesting person? I mean, is that just something that was like, I'm just a naturally interested person, you know?
Well, no, I don't know if I'm that interested, really, but so I've always loved to read. I'm not a podcast listener, but I'm a reader, and I read just lots of things. I feel like wherever I go, and people start talking about something, I've read something about it. It maybe not much, but something. I'm a magazine reader. I love books and magazines, and I always tell the social studies teachers, you should be reading two things. You should be reading a I don't know what you call it, a trade book, a pedagogy book, a teacher book. You should be reading a teacher book, and you should be reading a book that, for me, a social studies book. So for me, a geography book or a history book. One of the most interesting people I ever met was someone that I met in my first second year of teaching, and she was an English teacher, and she was one of the smartest people I'd ever met. And she knew about everything. And as an English teacher, I don't want to, say bad things about English teachers, but I wondered how she knew so much about history and geography, because all she read was fiction. And she, was telling me that fiction is full of all this great stuff. So I went out on a limb and I read a couple of novels. I mean, novels that I felt like I should. I remember I read Fahrenheit 451.
Sure.
Because I hadn't ever read it, but I knew about it. So she inspired me to read, those kinds of books, and to read more, which I thought I think that's fundamentally the most important thing, whether you're listening more, watching more, reading more, and then always with an eye to, for me, looking into how can I use this in the classroom? Because, teachers, it's what we do. Everything is about the art of teaching. A couple of years ago, I heard about a book, and I decided I would get it. And I started reading it and realized I don't need this book. I just do this. But it was a book called The Art of Noticing.
Oh,
And
I love that.
Yeah, I know the title is great. The Art of
That
Noticing.
is a great title.
So it's 131 ways to make or 51, I don't know what it was. But so I started reading it and doing the little exercises, and I realized I don't need these little exercises. But
that came to you naturally.
Yeah, this is just what I do. Maybe not as focused. Very, very simple kind of exercises to notice things. But what I did notice, because now I write a lot of curriculum, is if I pick one of their things, literally one of the exercises, like look at everything slantwise, or listen for ambient sounds today, or lots of it is color. You pick a color. And today I'm going to notice red. Wherever I go, I'm going to notice red. Such simple things. Or the way something is moving, or horizontal lines. There's so much. And if you're thinking about your lesson, it's amazing how much it'll connect. You're like, okay, I've got to write this lesson on this, but I really don't have an idea. Oh, today I'm noticing red. Oh my, and it comes together. Yeah. And you realize that's what I'm going to use in my lesson.
Just by getting better at noticing.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that makes a lesson interesting is when there's a lot of variety, and it's varied, and like I said, it connects to the real world. And students love stories. Like today's lesson comes to you from my backyard because
yeah, they do. Yeah.
Well, and that's what they walk away talking about. They retell the story that you told about something from your backyard. I remember years ago when was it a barbershop or something that was closing, and they had that big Art Deco.
Oh, it was a dance studio.
Yeah, a dance studio in West Bountiful was closing, and Chris went and asked if he could have this sculpture that they had in front, and there were just stories about getting it collected and mounting it in your backyard. And as a teacher of art history, I just felt like you lived it. Your students knew your passion for art. You created this space and you had stories so that they knew that you weren't just learning curriculum or teaching curriculum, you were teaching a passion that you had.
That it was a sign, it weighed, I don't know, tons.
Right.
We had to get a huge truck, but I didn't actually ask for it.
There's a story there.
I had taken photos of it to use because we were learning about Art Deco, the style, and this sign was in the Art Deco style, this huge metal sign. And I had taken pictures of local, things, and I asked students to find pictures locally. It was after the AP test, find things that related to the curriculum that we had studied, and students found different things. And I always showed that one and said how much I liked it. And a girl, I don't think she texted me. I don't think there was texting.
Yeah,
I think she must have called me or emailed me. And she had graduated a couple of years earlier, and she said, "Hey, I noticed that they were tearing that down to build the Costco down there in West Bountiful." And she said, my aunt worked there, and I asked my aunt what they were doing with the sign, and she gave me the number of the owner. And I called the owner and said, I know someone who would like that sign. And she sent me that number, and I called the owner and said, I'll give you $150 for it. And she said, if you'll take it away, it's yours. So I called another former student who was now a landscaper, and he brought in his truck, and we had to use welding things to cut it out. And then took a bunch of people and hauled it up to the house.
Yeah, so, that's a teacher who's making the sell about this is so interesting, what we're learning about, it becomes a part of our lived experience.
Well, and him noticing the sign, but then teaching that skill to his student who also noticed the sign. The other thing I think of is Tyson Grover, the science curriculum supervisor. I mean, it's all about phenomena in science right now, and but he's the same way. He'll be out mountain biking, and to his social media, he'll post a picture of something happening in the rocks with no explanation. He'll just say, what do you think is going on here? And it's just that, and I'm a science teacher, and I don't think I ever walked around seeing the world like that, or noticing and being like, oh yeah, like that is a phenomenon, or, and people always make fun of geologists being like, oh, rocks, but it's like, oh wow, even if you notice, it tells a story, and you're becoming interested and interesting.
But see, I think that's what you're saying about Tyson. He's out mountain biking, but science is still interesting. He's surrounded by science, but we're surrounded by all of our subjects.
Are we paying attention?
We are surrounded. Are we paying attention?
Yeah. Another thing I was going to say about Chris that I think is maybe a takeaway for all of us as teachers is he not only is a reader, but he's a clipper. So as he reads the Wall Street Journal every week, the New York Times, I can remember years you'd come in with your little stack of clippings from the New York Times, and here's something for you, and something for you, and something for you, and something to put on the wall. And, it's like he reads it with the mind of not just I'm getting information, but how can this interesting thing enrich someone else's experience or contribute to their job or what they're doing. So cool. And he's highbrow and lowbrow, because I know Reader's Digest.
I love Reader's Digest. Reader's Digest is
he's always finding really interesting things there.
Each Monday I walk through the office because my weekend is when I read the papers. So I read the Saturday Wall Street Journal. That's my favorite. Is the Saturday Wall Street Journal.
Good to know.
And then the Sunday New York Times. And I clip anything that has to do with any of our subject matter, and I walk around the office and just drop them on people's desks. I don't always read them, but I'll skim them or whatever. Yeah. But when I'm reading the paper, I'm reading it thinking of, I guess, not just thinking my mind, but thinking who would be interested in this? Who would want this? Who could this? And it's interesting to me. I mean, I've learned a lot about last week was Porgy and Bess. There's an article about Porgy and Bess as an American masterpiece, and it was interesting because I cut it out, and I thought, I really don't know much about Porgy and Bess. I mean, I've heard some of the songs, right? Mm-hmm. So I cut it out and I put it on Andrew Thorne's desk. And then that night, I'm a Pandora person, not a Spotify person. Spotify's too much work for me. But I was listening to one of my Pandora stations, and Lana Del Rey came on. And she was singing a song, I think it's called Doing Time or Going Time, or it's two short words like that. Yeah. And it is Summertime from Porgy and Bess adapted. And it was, it's just interesting how the universe hands you things when you're paying attention.
When you're noticing.
So all the connections that just start, happening among things. Yeah.
So outside of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, are there other mini suggestions that you would have to say hey, these are great things? I know Jenette and I would recommend maybe some podcasts to listen to, but are there other things you read or hear or watch that you feel contribute to that?
I think that if I were going to recommend one thing for anybody to read, and my son is a band teacher, and years ago when he was in college, I bought him a subscription to a magazine that I love called The Week. And it's actually a British publication, but I think it's British, but they have an American edition. I could be wrong there, I don't know. But it's fascinating. It's very short. It comes on Monday. You read it every week, and I read it religiously. I love it. It has recipes, homes for sale. It has a section on science. It's news. Has a little funny, very clever bit at the end, and it has a little crossword. It's something that you can sit down on a Monday night and read cover to cover, and be aware of things, and it's the connections that you can make to all kinds of subjects. For a teacher, I just think, or actually just for a citizen, anybody who's paying attention, it's a great digest, because I can't read the paper every day. I can't keep up on all of that, but it's a digest.
Okay, I like that. That's a good recommendation. My last question, as we're kind of wrapping up, is so we know most of our listeners are new teachers, and Jenette and I mostly work with new teachers. Is there something we've been talking about how to become an interesting person and reading recommendations, but if along this theme, if there was something that you wish you had thought of or the realization you had come to earlier in your career that you would want to pass on, is there something along those lines that you would want to share?
What I would say, there's a fine line between oversharing your life with students and not sharing enough about yourself with students. As a social studies teacher, it's really easy to connect it's probably easy for everyone to connect your real life, what you're reading, the rocks that you're seeing, with your classroom. And I think that's a super appropriate way for a teacher to share something about themselves, what they feel, what they see, how they think, and connect it to curriculum. And I think it makes it real, and I think it makes you interesting. How I guess I would illustrate that is I'm a James Bond fan. I've seen all the James Bonds multiple times. And in 2007, I was in the classroom, and I had used, as a geography teacher and history teacher, there are all kinds of little bits and pieces of James Bond. It goes all over the world in the very Cold War that I could use in class. And students knew that I loved James Bond. And I came to class, and they were all funny one day. This was 2007. I could tell something was up. And they had bought me two things. They had bought me the entire collection of all the James Bonds up to that point. Aww. So I had all the DVDs. And they had bought me the soundtrack of all the songs, the music. Yeah. And I didn't really ever I never said, I love James Bond, this is my... It was just something they figured out. This guy loves James Bond. He uses him in class all the time. And I see those teachers as I go out and watch our teachers that connect their lives to their curriculum. And I think students appreciate that. So my piece of advice would be, start noticing in the real world where your curriculum is, and share that with your students. Connect that to your lessons as much as possible.
Yeah. Did you think of a recommendation we want to end on?
Well,
Jenette?
yes, NPR.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're not already engaged in NPR, look that up. But I would say if you wanted to start with a podcast that's just consistently interesting and inspiring, and it will definitely, just talking about it makes you a more interesting person. I'd say This American Life.
For sure.
And then Radio Lab, which is another,
love
the
Radio
great science angle for that. So those are two fun ones.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Chris, for chatting with us today. And I am inspired. I'm inspired to go notice more and learn how to do that.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
I appreciate it.
Teachers should be collectors.
Yeah.
Right? And as you just collect literally and figuratively, et cetera, it contributes not only to our teaching, but to our wealth of world experience.
Exactly.
And so it's a treat to be in a profession where thinking is kind of what we do, and we can just always be collecting more and more interesting things to think about, talk about, share, etc.
I love that. Awesome. Well, thank you.
All right. Thank you.